cup of tea to start. Is good old Lipton's tea. Now, I've got tea for two reasons. One, I get thirsty doing this sometimes, and also the tea is quite useful for helping to mix my pigment. I just put a little bit of tea in here. I've got two types of pigment here. One I mix up quite strongly, so it's quite an intense mix, and the other is more of a wash. So this is underglaze blue painting on porcelain, and it's in a line and wash style. As you can see with this cup down here, the outline is done in a darker pigment and then a wash of blue is put in to fill it in. So these are pigments that are called gos, and they actually come from Arita in Japan, which is a porcelain centre that goes back a few hundred years to the Edo period when it was introduced from China. Now, see, the actual container that I'm using was one of my teacher's bowls, and in his studio in Kyoto he used the same sort of bowl for decorating from as well, so I'm just following in his tradition in that sense. It also reminds me of his workplace. There's a little water container. If I need to adjust the water, it's like a water dropper. I can just put a little bit in. I use a variety of brushes here. This is one of the ones that I'm using for the wash. It's quite a big brush. And then a variety of much finer brushes. And if I wet them, you can get to see just what sort of beautiful point they've got. You know, they're really beautiful pointed brushes. So the first task I've been doing with these is I actually sketch in a design with a sharp pencil because it gives me a nice fine line, and it's just a rough guide basically so that I know where I'm going with the painting, and that's all drawn freehand. So now I proceed to put some lines on this. You know, there's a lot of work that goes into making these pieces, but there's almost as much work goes into the painting as there does in the making. And you've got to take a great deal of care. And I'm using my sharp pencil again just to put some guidelines in. In many ways, the painting on the inside is the most awkward because it's the most difficult area to accurately get to. But that's the last bit that I'll do. So now, having got the basic lines in, I proceed to put in the fill. I usually start with the flowers and then move on to all the rest of the leaves afterwards. Now in most Japanese studios you'll find that the painters and the makers are different people. There's not very many potters that do the whole thing themselves. The studios tend to be a little bit specialized. You get people who sit and do nothing but paint and become very good at it as a result. So probably compared to a lot of Japanese painters, my work's a bit rough, but at least I'm having a go.
Talk about the history of blue porcelain.
The history of blue and white porcelain painting, it doesn't originate in Japan. It really comes, or it goes back more to the Ming period in China. You don't find a lot of underglazed blue painting in the Sung period, but Ming in China is where it really sort of came to the fore and was used to great effect. And it was this sort of period that actually, when it was introduced into Japan, and Japanese painting is distinctively Japanese compared to Chinese. And if you look at the painting and the styles and the subject matter, there's always a very distinctive difference. So they've perfected it. But, you know, Kyoto has its own styles, and having studied and worked in Kyoto, I tend to work more in a Kyoto style. But these pigments, I call them goss. It's not pure cobalt. You could say it's a polluted form of cobalt. It's more, a lot of them are originally natural blues, but most of them are mixed now. But they're a softer blue than pure cobalt, which is very harsh, and you can give it a beautiful wash. It's like using watercolors. So this is a pattern, as is usual with a lot of these things, that tends to follow itself around a form. And it's quite an old traditional pattern that was used in my teacher's studio. And this being a set of work that I'm doing for a daughter, I thought, and she being half Japanese, I thought she'd really appreciate this sort of work. But it does take time and a lot of patience. So having proceeded with one side, then I'll move around and it'll soon flow right around the cup. In Japan, there's a tradition with this type of painting. When you're doing quantities of them, as they do, they create a simple paper transfer and paint with a ground ash on the surface of the paper, and they wrap this paper around the cup and they rub it slightly, and they transfer the pattern on that way rather than using a pencil and sketching each time, and this saves them a great deal of time. But for just doing a small series, the effort to go and make the transfer and all the rest of it is not worth the effort. You need to have a steady hand because you can't afford to make mistakes. If you make a mistake on the surface of porcelain, the only rubber you've got is a very sharp knife to cut it away. So I'm not trying to follow the pencil line exactly. Once I start painting, I try and let it flow. And allow the brush to do its work. So I'm very nearly up to the stage of using the wash. Now I'm going to use this larger brush, which holds a lot more pigment, and I can proceed to put in a wash. So all the painting is still obvious through the wash. It's only a very faint blue, but it really adds to the character. And if beyond this I want to use any further colour, I can always do on-glaze enamel painting over the surface. Now, these very delicate areas, I just use a small brush for the wash. So the actual painting takes longer to do than the making of the cup. Now that's the basic cup painted on the outside. I've just got to complete the painting on the inside. And for this I'm using a very fine brush. And I have to be really careful. Now I go about the cross hatching and I paint the other way. More effective when I finish it. It's got one more process after this. Okay, and then one more final process. And then I go through the other way and it's done. And it's done. That's the painting of a cup, and it takes a little while.